First elected in 2002, he is the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, and he's also on the Ways and Means Committee. You know who he is. We've been talking about him all weekend, for months, possibly years. Devin Nunes. Devin, thanks for joining me. Appreciate it.
Great to be with you. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Nothing going on?
Not a lot.
Just wanted to hang out with
pretty easy day. I just wanted to hang out here, press box with you. It's great.
We want to thank the Miller family and everyone at Pressbox for having us.
Awesome.
So let's just have a conversation. We have a few notes here and there, but obviously you've got a lot of stuff going on. Mm-hmm. Let's not get to the campaign stuff right away. Let's talk about some of the stuff that you're known for, which is international affairs, obviously being a chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. I have a grandfather who's 99 years old. He is a Lithuanian immigrant, fought the Soviets, escaped, came here, worked for Ford for 30 years on the assembly line, has been a Republican his entire life.
Sounds like a good man.
Great man. Great man.
Does he live here in Fresno?
No, he lives in Detroit.
Okay.
He lives in Detroit. And this past election was the first time I saw him visibly upset with the Republican Party because he feels that the president is buddies with the KGB. Because obviously Putin's resume being in the KGB and whatnot. I'm going to go visit him next month. It's the holidays. And when I'm there, President Trump is going to be doing the second summit with President Putin. How do I look him in the eyes? How do I say, Julius, when you tell me that President Trump is in the pocket of President Putin, how do I say, I spoke to the U.S. intelligence chair and he told me X, Y, Z?
So I think what you have to do is you have to go back and look at what was the policy of Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, Secretary Clinton under Obama, President Obama, John Kerry, and they all had disastrous policies towards Russia. Donald Trump's position was no different than what all those previous administrations had been, exactly the same position. So moving forward, though, if you look at what's happened since then, since President Trump has been in office, he's actually finally holding the Russians accountable. Because remember, after the end of the Cold War, we had this whole reapproachment process, appeasement, and the Russians kept taking more and more and more when finally it culminated with Putin going totally out of control, back to another Cold War essentially, invading a country, right, taking Crimea, doing what he did in Syria. So very dangerous stuff. Right. And now President Trump is the first guy to actually stand up to him. So what we're dealing with here, and you've probably heard me say this a lot, but the biggest problem we have right now in the United States of America is we don't have a free and fair media. We don't have a media that is actually holding people accountable, getting the real truth out there. It's basically 90% are either owned by left-wing billionaires and doing left-wing activism all the time. Mm-hmm. We have about maybe 5% that tend to be more conservative, and you only have about maybe 5% of legitimate journalists. And even some of those journalists are not able to get real information out there because they're owned by a billionaire of some kind, and they know if they tell the truth, they can't get it out. So there's a lot of false narrative that's been built out there, and I worry about some of the American people who really believe these narratives that somehow the leader of the free world is somehow under the control of Vladimir Putin. I mean, that's really crazy. And just on the face of it, it was Obama's policies. Obama was the one, and Secretary Clinton, who did the reversal and drawdown of troops in Europe. And now you have President Trump, who's looking at putting a base in Poland, finally, which we've been advocating, Republicans have been advocating for a long time, and also looking at some issues dealing with Turkey and some of the things they're doing there. So anyway, tell them not to worry.
Okay. Well, do you think that if President Obama actually holds strong on the red line when it came to chemical weapons in Syria, that Russia doesn't think it's okay to go into Crimea?
Well, I mean, you'd have to start with going back whenever they did the drawdown in 2009, 10, and 11 in Europe. That was the beginning of the collapse, and that's when Putin knew he could push us around. So he canceled the missile system. He started withdrawing troops from Europe, and then you had the Red Line fiasco, Crimea, and everything else.
Gotcha. All right, you mentioned our buddies, Turkey. Obviously in the news right now with Saudi Arabia, and there being a lot of, you were talking about Cold War stuff. This is definitely a throwback to a Cold War situation. Now, you obviously are involved with keeping the peace in that area. It's very, very tough. But with Turkey, you have had a whole bunch of hostilities, not just to other countries, but within their own borders. Obviously, we had a journalist murdered in Saudi Arabia. Turkey has more jailed journalists than anyone in the world. How do you see this playing out?
So Turkey is a problem because Erdogan essentially now is a dictator. So for the longest time, Turkey was a key ally in terms of they were on the side of the United States, and it's a key location, right?
Absolutely.
Because it controls the territory coming from Africa and Asia up into Europe.
Right.
So it was stable, and generally it was a democracy. But once Erdogan got in, it's gotten worse and worse and worse. It's become more and more tilted towards radical Islam to some degree. They have not been helpful on a number of fronts. And so I'm worried where the trajectory of Turkey is off in the wrong direction. And if they don't correct it soon, I think it's going to get a point to where it's a point of no return to some degree.
And that's kind of leads into my next question is obviously we have so many bases and we've had such a great relationship with that country militarily. Yeah. I've been reading more and more that the United States is looking at other countries that we have bases in and either expanding them or putting new bases. Greece being one of them, a couple other ones where we're saying, hey, you know what, with the jets that we have now and the technology we have now, maybe Turkey, obviously important, but once you hit that line of demarcation, are we looking at that?
So our committee, the House Intelligence Committee, Republicans have been leading that effort at looking at contingency plans, and not just contingency, but also where are the best locations to put down to have our footprint for our future basing needs. And I feel that some of our allies in Eastern Europe are the right locations. So I was recently in Romania on the Black Sea, which I think there's a very good location there, very strategic. That's a location that I think is more valuable than the base that we have in Turkey.
Okay.
Now, of course, the base in Turkey has 50 years of infrastructure on it, billions and billions of dollars, versus Romania, which is an airfield. So you already know what the president's willing to do in Poland. So I think we have to start looking at what if Turkey doesn't come back and start to act like a normal country with normal relations and be part of the free world, and if it just falls into a dictatorship of some kind where they can't be trusted, we're going to have to look at I think, reducing the size of the troop strength there.
Understood. Speaking of Turkey, again, obviously we have a large Armenian and Greek population in your district. For decades now, the Armenian folks around here have been wanting the United States to recognize the genocide of 1918. With all the problems going on with Turkey right now, because the excuses have always been, well, they're a partner, well, we need them. Yeah. With all this stuff going on, can you see in the foreseeable future a president or a presidential candidate actually coming through and saying, because for years they've been saying, oh, when I get to the White House, we're going to recognize the genocide. They get there, they get a binder, and all of a sudden, I didn't realize how much stuff we have over there. This seems to be the first president that kind of say, yeah, I don't care what happened previously. I'm dealing with what's in front of me now.
Right.
Can you see a chance where the United States officially recognizes the genocide?
Yeah, so the recognition of the genocide has been, I think, a policy problem for the United States for a long time, and that we haven't been willing to say the obvious, which is it was not just one genocide, it was two genocides. And even though I believe there's the support in Congress, because of the military situation, because we've had thousands of troops on the ground, nobody's ever wanted to cross that line. So do I think it's time to cross that line? I do, because I think, number one, it's the right thing to do, but also because of Turkey's latest actions. So, the thing about this president, President Trump doesn't have those preconceived ideas, right? It's not, he was in business, so he wasn't, an expert on Turkish and Armenian genocide issues. But I feel that the time is right now to continue to push the resolution. But more so than that, it's going to be about we need to support Armenia also, because Armenia, we've talked about Russia earlier, Armenia is under, they heavily rely on the Russian government.
Absolutely.
And it's not a good place for them to be in, and they're in a tough part of the world, surrounded by a lot of bad folks.
Well, and you even were talking recently about how you felt that there was Russian meddling in regards to funding environmentalists in Europe, trying to get the Germans off of nuclear so that they have to buy gas from Gazprom, which is owned by the Russian government and obviously owned by Vladimir
Then for all these years, speaking of, to tell your grandfather, Trump's the first person to walk into a meeting and say, "Hey, Germans, why are you buying gas from the Russians?"
Right.
Nobody's ever been willing to say that and call them out, which is obvious. They want cheap gas from Russia for their economy, and they're willing to sacrifice not only their own national security and their neighbors' national security in Eastern Europe, because the Russians are moving that gas around Poland and Romania and some of the places that they used to control during the Cold War. So,
and you're starting to see more exports from the United States in regards to natural gas now.
That's right.
So obviously everyone sees this as a military conflict possibly, but it's really much more of an economic of who's buying what from what suppliers.
Right. And the Germans and the president's holding the Germans accountable, as he should.
Yeah. So, all right, enough international.
All right.
The water. Huge executive action by the president regarding biological studies and water and whatnot. I'm not originally from the Valley. I moved here when I was 13, not an agricultural family. And in your time of being a congressman, 2002 to right now, you have a lot of people who have moved to the Valley. Obviously, we're growing, and that's a great thing. I don't think a lot of people who have moved here understand the different types of water that we're dealing with. When we get a lot of water in the winter, I'll have relatives call me and say, "Hey, looks like you guys are good now. You guys had a great winter." Well, no, we're 5 years behind. Well, how is that possible? They'll come and visit and they'll see water in the canals and they go, "What do you mean you guys are short on water? There's water all up and down the freeway." Walk me through why this particular executive action is so important.
So there's a lot we can talk about here on this subject, but I think it's best if we start with talking about new people that move into here. And we talked earlier about false narratives. And one of the challenges is the media around here is so corrupted and so left-wing, is our own local media has never held politicians accountable for the actions that they took. So people mistake drought and equate that to lack of water. Right?
Correct.
Because naturally, if it doesn't rain, then you think, oh, well, it's a drought, it's natural. Well, the truth is, for people who just moved here, the first thing they need to know is that pre-1992, no matter any time we had a drought, we pretty much had water. Year in and year out, all the land was farmed in the valley. And nearly all the land on the west side. Right? But since 92, there was a law that passed that took away about 1 million acre feet. And then slowly, because of these biological opinions on the salmon and smelt, so the smelt's a little bait fish, that took about another 1 million acre feet of water away. Okay, so knowing that, then take another important fact that 80% of the water that goes into the delta, okay, so that's all the Sierras, the water comes down, goes in there, and then goes into the delta, and we pump that water and move it, an infrastructure that's been built for 60 years. So pre-92, plenty of water. Then they took half of it away, and then they've taken the other half away by putting in these biological opinions, which in 2009 were so draconian that led to this disaster that we have now. Because then we were so reliant on just the rain right here in the valley.
Sure.
We were totally reliant just on the rain in the valley, and because we couldn't move the water that we needed to move to farm all the land and recharge our aquifer. So what the president did is that he ordered a redo of those biological opinions, okay, which should amount to a lot of water for us. Okay, it's not going to be the full 2 million because Congress still has to act to overturn the 1992 law and to fix the Endangered Species Act. But I do believe it's the first water we're going to get since the 1960s. Is there any chance that you're ever going to be able to sit across the table in the state and actually be able to talk to the folks in San Francisco who actually care about the bait fish and say, let's figure something out? Or do you think or everyone is so ingratiated into their opinion? Not until you have a a free and fair media who are going to report the facts. And for decades we have not had that, and so you get these skewed false narratives out there that like, oh well, poor people in the San Joaquin Valley, gosh, it doesn't rain there, it's a desert, it's too bad there's no water. Not telling the truth that there was plenty of water pre-1992. There's plenty of dams that could be built to make sure that we have water for the next 200 years. And all the land used to be farmed. I mean, these are the types of facts that aren't out there, and the biggest culprits are our own local media. For decades, they have never held accountable the politicians, okay, which are the Democrats.
Right.
I'll just be frank with you.
Sure.
The Democrats are the ones who promote the protection of the smelt and the salmon, and so the final fact I'll tell you is that no matter how much water we've thrown out to the Delta and out to the San Francisco Bay,
right,
the fish populations do not equate to the amount of water that's going out.
You have colleagues from the Valley that are Democrats that every time they run every 2 years will say, I delivered great water infrastructure to the Valley. Does that keep you up at night that you know that they're literally lying through their teeth when it comes to folks saying that they've delivered and you know they haven't? Or they haven't delivered in the way that they say that they are?
Well, the biggest challenge we have is that, and I'm happy about this, that Temperance Flat was a project that I started.
Okay.
I passed it, and we started the feasibility study, we finished, we funded it for years, and now it's ready to be built. And the biggest problem we have is the project is, it's just a few miles from where we sit right now, which would be enormous economic benefit for Fresno and Clovis and the whole region, is that's ready to be built. The voters funded a bond measure, and the state...
Where's the money?
The state won't fund it.
Right.
And it's the Democrats who won't fund it. And so definitely for sure, the Democrats who are in the state assembly and state senate are total phonies around here. Mm-hmm. They're never gonna fight the people in Sacramento. I will say that on most occasions that Jim Costa is reliable.
Okay.
Recently been reliable. But the challenge still is our senators, Feinstein and Harris, who come in here, say the right things, never get asked the tough questions.
And book it.
It's easy to just say, hey, I'm for water, and then go vote the opposite way.
Right.
Or never send it. Why, if Feinstein is for this, where's her letter? Why isn't she weighing in with Governor Brown? How did they let this go to where, we vote for billions of dollars to build Temperance Flat, and yet they take the money and put it elsewhere?
Speaking of Senator Feinstein, just off the cuff on this one, were you surprised that the alt-left really turned their backs on her during the primary? That was something that really shocked me, that she's been, obviously with them for so long, and I think she counted on them every 6 years that she was gonna, have their back. I'm doing your work, and then all of a sudden they turn their back on her. Were you a little surprised by that, or not surprised at all?
Well, they've become so unhinged, and once again, we can go back to Russiagate. That alt-left that you have, which is probably 20% of the people of California. Mm-hmm. I mean, these people really believe that like Putin is secretly controlling the country, and that somehow the election was stolen from them. And so, no, it doesn't surprise me that they would turn on a longtime left-wing senator to support somebody who's basically a socialist.
Right. Okay.
And they've become a socialist party. I mean, there are no longer conservative Democrats within the Democratic Party. There are still conservative Democrats. Matter of fact, I think probably a third of registered Democrats in the state are generally conservative, but their party has left them.
Well, and I think everything has become so polarized. I think what we're doing right now and having a conversation doesn't happen anymore. It's more than a conversation. It is, I have to be right and you have to be wrong.
Right, but largely too, Jim, is because, and the reason I wanted to do this podcast with you is because you and I can have a conversation. Right? And because, if you go to the other media around here, I mean, there's some that'll be fair, but they just want to play gotcha games. They want to take orders from the left, and so you can't really get factual information out to the people of the Valley here. Which is why I'm
I appreciate that. There is one thing that I'm always surprised that we don't talk a lot about, and because maybe it's just not sexy or whatever reason, we've got a great naval base, and it very rarely ever gets in the news We've got all this new equipment coming. It is when people say, well, we need to quit spending so much money on military. Really? Walk me through how many jobs are affected by Lemoore. And they'll go, well, what do you mean? It's not that big. That's another thing that I think we know is there, but a lot of people don't understand how big Lemoore Naval Air Base is.
Which is also being impacted by the water situation. Because Lemoore Naval Air Station is out in the middle of the west side.
Right.
And a lot of that land out there has had to be fallowed, and it's causing dust problems. And so it's another reason why we need to get the water back, because what people don't understand about the base in Lemoore is those are our aircraft that land on aircraft carriers for the entire Pacific Fleet, and sometimes they even go to the Atlantic Fleet too. So it's a critical component to our nation's defense, and it's long. The Valley supports it. I mean, honestly, the people out in Kings County, it's David Valadeo's district, but they really do follow it. But yeah, you might. People that get up into the northern area, they don't realize that exists.
Yeah, they patrol the Pacific. I mean, for goodness sakes, I think everyone thinks that it's down in San Diego or these magical ships that just that sail up and down the coast, and it's Lemoore. So that's something that when we talk about intelligence.
And then here in Fresno, the jets that you see in Fresno,
absolutely,
the guard unit, those are actually the jets that are on call in case our airspace is invaded. So whenever kind of those Soviet, those old... the
MiGs.
Not the MiGs, but every once in a while they'll fly those 4-propeller aircraft. The
bombers.
Not the bombers.
Yeah.
It'll oftentimes be the planes out of Fresno that will go to intercept them. Can be.
Talking about the media. Every election cycle, usually the most politicians, city council, supervisor, whatever it is, they will do the same sort of mail. You'll get, I'm really great, my opponent is trash. Or, hey, did you know so-and-so drinks the blood of puppies, right? It's the same stuff we get, and I think it's become monotonous. This cycle, you authorized a 38-page mailer, magazine, whatever you want to call it, not against your opponent, but against the Fresno Bee. Some people loved it, some people hated it, and I think we know who that is. But you're the first person to say, I've had it. Not only am I going to just put mail out, I'm going to just document how much I think these guys stink. Walk me through your thought process on that sort of thing.
Yeah, well, look, I've always thought that treating the voters and the people of the Valley like adults and giving them information. So a lot of politicians will say, don't send stuff that the voters have to read. Just do like 3 lines and send it to them. And I just don't believe that. I think that people generally are smart, and that we have an obligation to take time to try to educate them. And so that's precisely why I did that magazine. And we have done magazines in the past. Now, it didn't have the good artwork on the cover like this one did.
Right.
But it's funny that that's the one that gets covered, because we've done magazines pretty much every election going back for a while now. They were policy magazines, and people enjoyed them. People that like to read about policy, read about issues, and so that's why we did it. It's to educate the voters, and let's not. We cannot kid ourselves anymore as Republicans. You cannot deal with these people. Like I said this in the magazine, but if anybody thinks the Fresno Bee is not the propaganda arm of the left, they're kidding themselves.
Right.
Any Republican who deals with them is out of their mind, because they're out to get the Republican Party.
Well, I was also, when we talk about this on Sunday Morning Matters, I said this to Bill McEwen, and I've said this to John Ellis and Jim Boren, was when they were at the Bee, and you or anybody else would have come at them personally, or their publication personally, they would have been putting camouflage on their face, they would have been getting in a Jeep, they would have been barking. I was surprised that the Fresno Bee went passive-aggressive and said, well, Devin's just being mean and nasty. Well, is he really being mean and nasty? Or is you can't play the victim card on this one. What I said on television was, you were looking, not you, the Bee, you've been looking for smoke for years. You found the smoke, and now you got it. What are you going to do with it? And instead of going one-on-one, say, you know what? Why don't we bring Devin in? Why don't we hash it out, or at least do what we're doing right now? get it on camera. They did it with a lot of different things. Let's have it out. Let's say, Congressman, we think you're wrong on this one, and you do it. Instead, it appears, especially lately when it's coming down to Election Day, they've almost backed your opponent into a point where not just giving them an endorsement, but being the soldiers for them. They're being ground troops for them right now.
Right.
In my opinion, from what I'm seeing.
No, that's exactly right. So
were you expecting that?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, they've been doing it for a while.
Not on this level.
Not to this level, but it continued to build, and it continued to get worse.
Because I think
now the good thing is now that it's actually really nice because they're just, to me, they are the Democratic Party. They're the arm of the radical left. So, and that's how I see them. I don't see these as, this is not like, oh, maybe they're going to be fair. No, they're not going to be fair. They are part of the radical left. I mean, let's not forget, McClatchy as an organization has ties to Fusion GPS, that we led the investigation on Fusion GPS. I mean, they've wrote total fake news stories multiple times and been busted for it. I'm talking at the highest levels of McClatchy. So this is coming down from McClatchy. They've given the Fresno-Bee the direct orders to come out and attack me, which is fine, but people just need to know, and I'm going to tell them that's what they're doing.
It just appears
it's not about, this is not a media organization. This is a left-wing activist
and
organization.
It definitely seemed like since President Trump came into office, and because you were on the transition team, and then when you became the intelligence, the head of the intelligence committee, is when the Fresno-Bee got nastier with you.
Yeah.
Because for years, obviously they've been left for a long time, but they haven't been this militant with you and others, not just you.
Yeah.
Is this sort of their last hurrah, or because they're bleeding. They're bleeding right now.
Well, for what happens to them is not my concern as much as how are people in the Valley going to get good information. And so that's what I'm focusing on right now, is looking at who can I support. Who can I give interviews to? How do we develop a real media outlet here for the Valley that's going to cover things like the good things in this Valley, like Fresno State,
doing great this year.
High school sports. You look at the water issue, which is the number one issue to this region. There should be daily stories on water and ag businesses. There should be daily stories on businesses that are growing here in the Valley, like positive information for people so that they'll want to locate to Clovis and open up a new business, right? So these are the types of issues that should be covered, and I'm going to do everything I can to support organizations that will actually cover the good things of the Valley and tell the truth, not just propaganda outlets. One
last topic. You're talking about things that are important to the Valley. Immigration. Obviously this caravan that's been coming from Central America, obviously, other immigration. DACA was big from day one. That's something that we talk about on television a lot also. We led with my grandparents. I'll end it with my grandparents. My grandparents came over here on the Marshall Plan. Both my grandfather from Lithuania and my grandmother from Germany. They were in refugee camps after World War II. They spent a couple of years there. In order for them to come to the United States on the Marshall Plan, which the United States funded, they had to have a sponsor. They had to have a job. They had to have a backup job. They had to tell the government where their residence was for a certain amount of time, and they had to enroll to become a citizen of the United States. I think it worked because no matter where my grandparents and their friends that they associated with were, they were that nationality, but they were happy to be in the United States, not because they were just making money, but this was purely the land of milk and honey, that they came here. They had a middle class job, and they loved life. Can we go back to that? Can we bring back a version of the Marshall Plan that says we want you here? How do we do that?
So we got the closest we've ever come under this president, who most think is anti-immigration this year, and it was David Valadao, Jeff Denham, who really led the way. They got us to a point where we were able to get 180 Republicans behind a piece of legislation. You need 218 votes in the House. But because the Democrats have not accepted the last election, they're not willing to actually vote for anything that the Republicans are for, we got no Democrats to support it. And so the bill that's out there that the president proposed, building the border wall, not a wall across the entire border,
Understood.
but in the population centers, dealing with the ag worker program, a tech program, dealing with the young people that were brought here by no fault of their own, it essentially solves 90% of the problem, right? And this president actually, who people thought was anti-immigration, actually ends up supporting something that no Republican president had ever supported. With that said, people have to realize that there's two sides in this country, two extreme sides in this country. One side says, we're not going to let anybody in. We're not going to let anybody in because the people here have to get out.
Right.
Well, okay, I understand that's your position. You're committed to that position, but it's not realistic. It's not realistic.
No.
But you have the other side who says, all these people here, we're going to take care of you. We're going to give you all amnesty, and you're going to vote Democrat. We're going to register you Democrat, and even California here, they're even letting them register now. People who are here
San Francisco
illegally.
right now are voting in the Unified School District vote.
So
yeah.
So there are probably 50 people in each party that are like that, which leaves 300 Republicans and Democrats
Figure it out.
who should agree with what the president proposed. And that's the solution. The solution is real border security with the wall where it will work, virtual wall everywhere else, letting people sign up for ag, high tech, and DACA, and then letting all the other people over time apply for these work permits.
Gotcha.
It would solve the problem completely.
Congressman,
Thanks, Jim.
take care of yourself.
Yeah, thank you.
represented the 22nd District, first elected in 2002. He was now the chairman of the U.S. House Committee.
All right, ready?
We're going live.
And it's just on you for first part, right?
Right.